Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Epica, titled The Quantum Enigma. Now, I've often made the statement in the past that lyrics are most likely the least important thing in symphonic and power metal. Or at least for me, for the longest time they were. Now that's not saying I didn't notice bad lyrics or wasn't aware that some symphonic metal could get unbelievably silly or ridiculous at points. It's just that I didn't tend to mind as much as long as the instrumentation, production, and delivery were able to deliver that epic sweep on their own, the very reasons that I went to this particular subgenre of metal. But if I was looking for a band to violently change my mind on this particular belief, that band would be Epica, an act I could only possibly describe as the thinking man's brand of symphonic power metal. Now, for the longest time, I'd had a really hard time getting into Epica, mostly because I found the guitar tone chosen on those early albums to be a little bit flat and unflattering, and Simone Simons to be a very talented singer, but you know what, not particularly engaging behind the microphone, at least on those early albums. And on top of not really having a real immediacy to their hooks, I ignored this band for a very long time. But man, once I got past that first album and really started digging into their lyrics, color me wrong about this band. Epica were not only tackling big enough subject matter to match their massive orchestrations, but also doing it with a lot of intellect, due consideration, and a lot of richly articulated nuance. This was a band that routinely explored religion, politics, philosophy, and mortality. And once they had improved their production somewhat and picked up a heavier guitar tone and a rhythm guitarist, I found myself really getting into this band. Now, that's not saying that Epica doesn't have their own unique problems. I'd be lying if I didn't say that Epica didn't get preachy every once in a while, and I still think as a band they hadn't quite mastered a killer hook like their contemporaries in Nightwish and Within Temptation. But you know what? Mark Jensen and Simone Simons remained really strong songwriters and performers, and they were only getting better with every subsequent album. And coming after their 2012 album, Requiem for the Indifferent, an album demanding the audience engage with the world and be willing to work together to tackle world-shaking problems and not be divided and unwilling to compromise, I was very interested in their newest album titled The Quantum Enigma. Now, initially I saw the quantum and I began to think, okay, they're going to tackle quantum physics again, or rather the complete failure of modern society to not recognize that brand of science and how they might need to evolve to fit with the times. But you know what? I was not certain how they were going to approach quantum mechanics this time, so I was wondering if and how they'd managed to pull this off twice. So I picked up the album and dug in really deep. What'd I find? Well, this is a bit of a strange album, that's for damn sure. Not a bad album by any stretch. The instrumentation is epic and vibrant and probably the heaviest Epica has ever been, but in the performances, they're really something special all on their own. But lyrically, this album is approaching a very complicated subject, and while I really do admire the ambition behind it, I'm not quite certain the band pulls it off, at least for me. In other words, this is easily Epica's most ambitious album in 5 years, and while it's definitely worth your time if you're a fan of the band, or hell, even if you're not, I'm not quite sure it's their best, and I'm not quite sure it's my favorite of theirs either. So, okay, let's start with instrumentation and production. And you know what, if you've heard an Epica album at all, you already know what you're getting going into this album. Huge symphonic arrangements with full backing choirs, potent guitar riffs, and intricate melodies driven by the keyboards, with the production on this record easily being the most vibrant that it has ever been in capturing the full orchestral power and scope and the real metal edge. And while I prefer a few more quiet moments and a little bit more instrumental diversity in the orchestra, I can't deny that with the more technical guitar work and the more complex melodies, Epica is only getting better as musicians. What's all the more impressive is that Epica has finally managed to get a firm handle on melody-driven hooks, which easily makes a lot of songs on this album stand out all on their own. I won't say the instrumentation on this record is perfect. I do think a few songs could do with a little bit trimming back, especially when we get fewer guitar solos than I would normally like to see on a metal record. And it's hard to ignore the usage of triggers on the drums, which can get distracting for me. But you know what? Otherwise, with production this opulent and rich, I have a hard time not really loving this music. Now, it also helps matters that the vocals are pretty damn solid as well. Simone Simons has improved volumes over the course of Epica's career, and she can easily carry the majority of this album. And thus, it can get a little bit exasperating when the backing chorus is brought more often to the forefront of this album, often mixed very close to the same volume as Simons. My only real nitpick in the vocals is Mark Jansen's growl vocals. Not that I dislike them in principle or that they don't fit the atmosphere of the record, but that they sound a little less explosively raw in comparison to previous albums. Look, by no means bad, let me stress this, but not quite at the same level of intensity. And considering that the screaming has been mostly pared back, I would keep thinking that the amount of rougher vocals has decreased in favor of the choirs, which to me feels like a little bit of a misstep, especially considering this album is easily Epica's heaviest and could have felt most appropriate for more growled, rough vocals. But what about those lyrics I spent so much time talking about before? What was that grand concept that Epica was trying to explore on this album? Well, it wasn't exactly quantum mechanics, I can tell you that. And unlike previous albums, it's a lot less defined. And until I started really digging through the lyrics and translating the Latin pieces, I was completely at a loss. I admit that. But after several listens, I finally figured this out. This is an album about how the modern human mind deals with concepts it cannot possibly hope to understand. The one being referenced most on this album being death. And as usual for an Epica album, the band tries to explore every facet of this high concept idea. How to quiet one's mind to attain singular focus and the essence of silence. How society doesn't want humanity thinking about those bigger problems, as it could lead to instability throughout society and songs like chemical insomnia and natural corruption. And yet how we as a species must keep trying to tackle these concepts in some way regardless throughout the title track, Sense Without Sanity, and Unchained Utopia. Now, all this bears a striking resemblance to themes explored on the most recent Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album, Push the Sky Away. And honestly, I really do love how Epica just goes for broke, tackling a very complicated and very difficult to articulate topic. But here is the big problem. It's almost a little bit too high concept, especially considering that Epica doesn't really frame the story of this album through a narrative or an allegory of some kind as they've done in the past, which honestly might have helped considering talking about unknowable, impossible for humanity to comprehend subjects. They do have some known symbolism and reference points in modern pop culture. Hell, forget the whole wealth of imagery surrounding dealing with death and what might come after that humanity has built up over the course of millennia. I'm a little bit surprised that concepts like the singularity or deeper religious iconography or even Cthulhu never really appeared on this album, as they bear a lot of similarities. And since the songwriting can become so vaguely sketched at some points in order to articulate this rather difficult subject, it can lead to some lyrics coming across as more than a little cheesy, especially when delivered through a full backing choir. And yeah, of course, this happens all the time in symphonic metal, but it doesn't often happen with Epica given their more serious subject matter and honestly better songwriting. It's just that in their choice of something so high concept, they force the songs to go broader in their language. But you know what, that's a minor problem in comparison with the really big issue of such a high concept album and such a high concept premise. Yet in outside of terrific delivery and presentation, it's a little hard to build a very solid emotional connection to this material because it doesn't feel grounded in human drama. And since the presentation is so bold and epic, I can't help but feel a little bit distant from this record emotionally. Look, I dig the intellectual challenge of the lyrics, but they don't really quite connect with me on a deeper level in comparison with the instrumentation, which I connect with in a very strong way. It feels hard to tie together, that's what I mean. Look, you all know I'm going to recommend this album. As smart symphonic metal comes out this year, it doesn't get much better than Epica's The Quantum Enigma. It's a gloriously presented, excellently produced, very stimulating album to listen through and analyze and think about, and on that level alone, it gets an 8 out of 10. A very solid 8 out of 10, I might add. But make no mistake, this album is ambitious almost to the point of hubris, and if it had managed to land the human drama a little bit more effectively, I would adore this record. As it is, The Quantum Enigma definitely lives up to the last word of its title. And if you're looking for a lyrical challenge accompanied with some seriously kick-ass music, pick this album up. You will not regret it, I can promise you that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.